IMDb. You did a fantastic job in this as well, so thank you for that. I loved that wedding sequence. But being a consultant, obviously you have a say in a sense, but it's also Hollywood, and there's the Hollywood machine, and they do their thing. So I kind of want to just ask you, how accurate was the portrayal of this community? I mean, as much as you could try to make it as accurate as you could, like how accurate was it? But did Hollywood take any little Hollywood shortcuts with this?
Hi, Emma. Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. I'm very excited to be part of the inaugural program of this wonderful series. And thank you for that. I have to say that as you know, I've consulted on several projects and of varying kind of scopes and varying levels of Yiddish and Hasidic culture and so on and so forth. I'm sorry, this is the first time that I was brought on this early in the process, before the script was actually written. And I did have a surprising amount of kind of editorial input on the project, and I was constantly surprised at the amount of deference the writers and the director and the producers showed to me, and to kind of and their commitment to authentically portraying the community as much as possible. And I think I can unequivocally say that the Hasidic community has never been portrayed this accurately before. Certainly not in a narrative. I mean, in documentaries, sure, but this is not a documentary, and I can't stress that enough. Of course, we took artistic license wherever the storytelling kind of require that, and it is obviously a dramatized version of the truth, and a very subjective version of the truth. I mean, this is a story about a woman in a very kind of extraordinarily troubled family and environment. And so it cannot be understated that this does not represent the normal, typical Hasidic family at all in terms of its family dynamics. And I dare say the Yankee is not representative of the average young Hasidic man, in the sense that he is kind of an extreme version of a mama's boy, extremely naive, both when it comes to things like sex and when it comes to like the world at large, very uneducated, and so for dramatic reasons, and also because part of this is actually Deborah Feldman's story, we chose kind of extreme examples of the truth. That being said, I think every Hasidic person will tell you that they have known people within the community exactly like that, and that this actually does happen in real life. But I'm happy to say that most of the time, it doesn't necessarily happen in such an extreme fashion.
Well, go Netflix, because I know that that's not always the case, that that big production companies listen to people from the community that they're portraying. So that's great. I'm happy to hear that. And yeah, of course, in Hollywood, you always have to make every character a little heightened. You know, that's good storytelling. But along that line, so the other actors who were in these scenes, it just felt so authentic and genuine to me. Like, everyone felt like such a like they were living that life to a degree. And I was just wondering, were all the actors, did they pull a lot of the other actors from the Hasidic community, or were those actors who are just fantastic actors who you had to sort of fill in on the cultural aspects of what they were portraying?
So certainly the only lead in the series that comes from the Hasidic community himself is my now best friend, Jeff Wilbush, who is an amazing actor, an amazing person. He grew up in very, very Hasidic Jerusalem, kind of ran away from home when he was 13, became a well-known and well-respected actor in Europe, moved to Berlin, and then somehow got wind of this project. And we had long given up on finding a Yiddish-speaking actor anywhere but New York, certainly an ex-Hasidic actor. And he was in Berlin. And when his agent reached out to us, we were very skeptical. Like, really, Hasidic speaks Yiddish?
Mhm.
It was almost too good to be true. Um,
Mhm.
and then I also had, because I had so much input on the project, I managed to get practically my entire theater troupe from the Yiddish Rep into the audition room. Most of them got roles. Some were larger, some were smaller. And some of them are kind of my fellow ex-Hasidic colleagues. Some of them, like the role of the aunt Malka, the father Mordechai, are Yiddish speakers, but are not necessarily ex-Hasidic themselves. But they do have quite a bit of exposure to kind of that life, that culture, that world. So, of course, they were able to portray it that much more authentically. But, we, as much as possible, tried to just pack the room, pack the set with as many authentic voices as we could. And that really
Yeah,
set the tone for everything.
you could tell. I mean, you really could tell. At least from the outside looking in, it felt like that. It felt very, it just felt like such a world was built in this show so exquisitely. So that was really cool. And the Yiddish, having people talking Yiddish pretty much almost exclusively in some parts of the show was so cool too. And I love, again, props to you and to Netflix and anybody else who like stuck to that, because I always hate it in shows when they water it down and they they're supposed to be in France, but they're speaking proper English, and you're like, okay. I love it when they can show a culture. Like, I think audiences are intelligent enough these days to like really appreciate that. Plus, Yiddish has some like amazingly fun words, which I love hearing. So I wanted to sort of go over to Frimet a little bit. You have some incredible articles online, which I wasn't able to read all of them, but I was able to read a few of them. I think that your voice for that community is really important. I wanted to kind of ask you, so you've seen the show, I assume? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you work on the show?
I did not, no. So I want to start by congratulating Eli for a job well done. Eli is a friend of mine, and I don't think any of us expected him, because he traded his cushy law practice for Hollywood. I don't think we expected you to make it. So yay, Eli. Really proud of you. I did see the show, and I got early access because I wanted to review it. And so I watched it at first as, just a viewer, and outside the lens of the book. I wanted to see it as its own creation. And I was texting with Eli as we watched it. My husband and I watched it together. And we were very moved by a lot of it, especially that penultimate scene where Yankee, I don't know if we're allowed to spoil, right? Everyone has seen the show, yeah. Where he cuts his payas to kind of show his commitment to her, and trying to win her back. And that was very moving. And I'm kind of hoping for a second season where they reunite Yankee and Esty. that would be interesting. That would be a nice twist. And then I watched it as a reviewer and as a critic. And once you enter that space, you kind of have to look at it with a more critical eye. And I noticed I originally reviewed it for Vanity Fair, and they eventually killed it because, you know, freelance budgets have been slashed. So I gave it a more in-depth treatment, which I had to cut in my final review or broader analysis of Hasidim in cinema and on TV. And I noticed, you know, certain nuances that they got right and others that they didn't, certain characters that they treated more sympathetically than others. I do think it was a more of a feminist show, right? Because she finds her freedom, she seeks freedom, and she discovers it. My main criticism of the show is that there's many of us who leave the community spend a lot of years in that liminal space, where we try to acculturate and very officially, right? We don't know this world. And I thought that was not given enough airtime. We didn't see that happening. She goes to Berlin and she immediately becomes friends with these very accepting, very open individuals, and she buys a pair of jeans and, you know, and puts on lipstick and goes to the club, and everything seems so easy, and it's not. It's a tough transition. But again, you know, this is Hollywood. It was a 4-episode series. It was fiction. You know, these are all, I think, valid reasons that they couldn't represent the breadth of what it means to leave this community, and also the breadth of the community in general, the Hasidic community. There is both joy and pain, beauty and, you know, stringencies that many find very restrictive. So, yeah.
No, that's interesting. You make a really good point now that you sort of said that, put that into words. Yeah, her transition out of the community did seem, I mean, she definitely, I think that actress is very, very talented. I thought she portrayed her character really, really wonderfully. I'd never seen her before, and I hope to see so much more of her. I thought she was fantastic. And she definitely had this naivete, almost like doe-like innocence when she first arrives, and doesn't really know what to do, but is a survivor, you know, kind of immediately figures out a way to survive, which is amazing, and maybe true to this woman's story. But along the lines of, you're right, I would love to have seen, because those moments where she's kind of come up against this culture that is more the norm for a larger swath of people, but was not her culture, when she comes up against those, that is a really interesting tension that you're right. I wish they had explored that more, and maybe they will if there's a second season, which I actually really hope there is too, because I think that'd be really fun. And I hope it's more than 4 episodes. Maybe the success of this will prove to the industry that, you know, we actually like these kinds of, you know, stories about communities that we don't normally see, because it's just so interesting. It's such an education in some ways. But along the feminist lines, you know, there are a lot of things. This is from her point of view, and her point of view of trying to break out of this community. As a woman yourself who broke out of this community, you know, obviously everyone has reasons for wanting to break away from something or leave something, and the traditions of that community seem both, and this is reflected in a lot of how this character talks about it, even how Essie's birth mother talks about it occasionally. You know, there are things about the culture and the community that they both really love and they really miss. And then there are other things that just were too much for them to feel, you know, to continue moving in that world. For you, now that you know, we don't have to get too specific, but did you find that for you, the choice to leave was because of some of those restrictions around being a woman or family, or what was it that kind of was your impetus for stepping away from the community yourself?
Oh, how much time do we have? Well, it's a long story, but you know, our transition out was very gradual, and it took, you know, a decade for me to reach a place where I can say I am comfortable where I am. The impetus was, it was also a very gradual move towards disillusionment, even though I probably could not have articulated this at the time. So I was not your typical Hasidic girl growing up. I mean, I was at first. I was a good girl until one day I wasn't, because I had discovered a Reader's Digest with a friend, and then we discovered Nora Roberts' trashy romance novels. And we pooled our funds and we went to purchase them from Walmart, and I hid it under my mattress in my bedroom. And, you know, there was this big world outside the proverbial walls of my community, and my curiosity grew. Eventually we graduated to DVDs, and I watched How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days probably 10 times under the covers in my bedroom, you know, and I was just fascinated by this world. Eventually a matchmaker called my mother. I was only 17. I was too young really to be set up for a match. The normal age is 18. And I overheard that he was an older boy. And so I thought, that's interesting. That might be something to look into. So, you know, I heard through the grapevine of Yentas that he wasn't your average Hasidic boy either. He drove a car, he went to the theater, and I pressured my mother to pursue the match. She wasn't sure, but I'm the 10th child in a dozen, and she was kind of tired at that point. And she gave in, and I met him for a basho, which is the very short meeting between a prospective bride and groom. And it was eerily similar to the scene that you saw in Unorthodox, where, you know, you sit across each other at a table, your family is on the other side of the door, and you make these awkward chit chat about the number of children in your family and what you do, what your work is like. And I was trying to gauge how much exposure he had to the secular world. So I asked him whether he listened to the radio, and he said he did. And I was like, okay, it's a done deal. You know, yeah, all right, we'll get married.
Wow, it sounds like you
that's simple for me. I wanted out, I wanted freedom, I wanted someone who would explore the world with me, even though I could not fully articulate it. I was young, I was 17, right? Anyway, we got married, and the first 2 years were tough, and it was awkward, and we didn't know what love is, and we didn't know how to love, and we did, you know, I mean, all of those things. We don't have time for all that, but we did frequent the library, and we did watch movies, and we were not alone. We weren't the only Black sheep in the community. We had a few neighbors and friends who covertly watched movies, and so we had the opportunity to discuss all of that with them. Eventually, I began to modernize very slightly in dress. I changed the style of my wig, which was suspicious to, you know, the modesty police and to the people around. There is a modesty committee in the community. Just to mention, I grew up in Kiryas Joel, which is an enclave in upstate New York, exclusively Satmar, belonging exclusively to the Satmar Hasidic sect, which is where Esti, the fictional character, grew up in Brooklyn. So that's sort of the epicenter of the Satmar Hasidic sect, Kiryas Joel. And then you have a community in Brooklyn, a community in Borough Park, and then offshoot communities in the rest of the world. Anyway, so eventually I got pregnant with my daughter. I had a son, and then I got pregnant with my daughter, and I stopped shaving my head. It wasn't a conscious decision as much as it just felt very practical. I didn't have to go to the mikveh, which is the ritual bath, because I wasn't menstruating, and no one would see me. And I figured I could hide my hair, you know, pin it up meticulously, wear a turban on top of it. The modesty committee got wind of it somehow. Neighbors must have seen a stray hair, you know, and they summoned us for a meeting. My son was about to enter school, the cheder, which is a boys' school. He was not 3 yet, and they start at like 2.5. And we were summoned to a meeting with 8 middle-aged men who are kind of tasked with maintaining the highest standards of modesty in the community. And they spoke to my husband, never directly to me, that we are modernizing. And they also heard that I grow my own hair. We denied it, but we came home that night, and they said they won't accept our son back into school. So I came home that night and I dusted off the shaver and I shaved my head, because what else were we gonna do? And then a couple of months later, we decided to leave because the strictures were too much.
Right.
We were adamant to remain Hasidic at first, and then to remain very, very Orthodox. And so the transition was very gradual.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. It sounds like it was a mixture of both curiosity of the secular world pulling you in, and also feeling just like a little repressed by some of these modesty things. Ellie, was for you, because you also left your community, Frimet just mentioned that there's a lot of younger people, or maybe not even younger people, but there are a lot of people who kind of surreptitiously, you know, want to be a part of the or interested in the secular world. And I think they kind of show that with the cousin character, about how he kind of left a lot to like go to Vegas, or even in Berlin, he's like doing all these things that are not traditional to be doing. Do you feel that there's a lot of people in the community who would be happier if the community were able to like loosen up on some of its restrictions? And because it sounds like you still have a lot of respect for the community and the traditions and a lot of the, you know, the family aspects of it. But in your opinion, like Eli, or Ellie, sorry, do you think that that's a movement that could be growing?
I'm sorry, you cut out during that question, but I think I got the gist of it.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, in so many respects. I remember as a kid in the synagogue, there was one guy who was several years older than me, and he kind of visibly started to rebel. He stopped wearing his Hasidic hat. He'd show up to synagogue without his hat on. He'd wear like modern tailored suits, and it started wearing a tie. And to me, it was the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen, because you know, in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, it just, if somebody left, they just disappeared overnight. It's as if they had passed. They just ceased to exist. Their names weren't mentioned. They were completely ostracized, and they just would never show their faces again. Today, there's this entire neo-Hasidic movement where people are either moving out and, you know, starting their own kind of neo-Hasidic communities that are kind of culturally Hasidic but much more liberal socially, or they actually stay within their own neighborhoods. And so it's become a lot more normal and more acceptable, and people are learning to accept people who look somewhat different, and so on and so forth. But it's still, I mean, the resistance is obviously still very, very big. In most cases, people are only able to do that once they're married and they have spouses that go along with them, because part of the power of the community is really the matchmaking system. because whenever you have kind of a matchmaking system, reputation is everything. And so nobody wants to do anything that brings them into the public eye in any negative way. And really, any publicity is bad publicity when it comes to that. So you want to conform as much as possible. You want to toe the line. You don't want to do everything. You don't want to do anything to stand out. Because really the only key to happiness in the Hasidic community is to make a good match from a good family, hopefully a well-to-do family. And that's kind of the middle-class Hasidic dream. If you do anything outside of the norm, it takes you longer to find a match. And the longer it takes you to find a match, the more likely it is that you will never find a match, because you have a very limited shelf life. And after a certain point, you're considered an older boy or an older girl. And at that point, your best shot at getting married is either somebody from a very dysfunctional background, or somebody who's considered in any way, shape, or form, damaged goods, whether a divorcee or a divorcee, or somebody with a disability. I mean, it is really, really, people are really objectified in that sense. And so the threat of damaging your marriage prospects is so powerful and so extreme that it doesn't really take much else to just keep people towing the line. Of course, once you're married, you start having children right away because there is no family planning. 5 years later, you're barely 25 and you already have a house full of toddlers. The chances of you ever leaving the community are practically nil. So that is really the power of the system. And
it's interesting.
And then,
sorry, I was just going to say, it's interesting that you say the power of the system, because yeah. I mean, I could talk about, this is so interesting to me, and I hope it's been interesting to everybody else. Unfortunately, we only have an hour, so I'm going to have to throw it to some Q&As in a second, but I did just want to mention that, the Hasidic community, or the power of the structure of something like that is really very similar to a lot of other kind of extreme religious sectors. You know what I mean? You find it in Christianity, you find it in the Muslim culture, you find it in, even in like Hindu, and like, religion in its essence is wonderful, but it also can become this very restrictive form. And I think there is a growing movement, and I hope there is more of a movement in all of these communities to be a little bit more open-minded, because I do think that you might get more really wonderful people to be involved and cherish the good parts of religion that are there to help people, and there to create family and create community and all that lovely stuff. So I'm gonna have to throw back over to Ingrid for Q&As, but I just want to also do a little shout out, because I'm a nerd, and I'm a film nerd. We have someone tuning in, Mr. Paul Haggis, that I just want to say hello to. Thank you so much for joining us. Paul's an amazing screenwriter, director. You guys have seen his movies before, I'm sure. So anyway, that's just very exciting to know that I've been Zooming with Paul. He was actually on the, I believe he's on the judging panel at this past year's Chelsea Film Festival.
He was the president of the jury, yes.
Yeah, the jury, okay. So anyway, thank you, Paul, and thank you everybody else for being here. It looks like you guys have a number of really interesting questions. So again, Frimet, Eli, thank you so much. It's been a joy. I wish I could talk to you guys for hours. Maybe we'll have you on again if there's a season 2 or whatever. And thank you so much for all that you've done, for audiences to learn about something that, we didn't know much about. So thank you so much, both of you. And Ingrid, over to you.
Thank you, Emma.
So our first question is from Karen. Karen asks, how did people in Berlin react to the shoot? So that's a question for Eli.
Yes. Well, I mean, on the one hand, Berlin is becoming this really cosmopolitan, open, and diverse and liberal city. I would say Berlin is to Germany kind of like what New York is to the US. It really doesn't reflect the rest of the country at all. It's very different from the rest of Germany that way. It was pretty surprising for me how little attention we kind of drew to ourselves, dressed in full Hasidic costume in various parts of Berlin, including some heavily Muslim neighborhoods, where I got to say, I was really, really pleasantly surprised by the reaction of passersby. I mean, we filmed in a Turkish wedding hall in Berlin that is used all the time for Palestinian weddings, and we had lots of Muslim extras on set. So it was really kind of beautiful to see how the various parts of the community came together in that show. I'm trying to think of a kind of specific anecdote that really portrays that. But for us, it was really more interesting to see. It was really surreal because you kept having to pinch yourself that you're not in Williamsburg, you're in Germany, and this is happening there.
Our next question is from Kurt. He's asking, some of the series issues reminded me of the book, My Name is Asher Lev. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's about it's about a similar community. So obviously there will be a lot of parallels and a lot of similarities. The experiences track and are quite universal in that way. I don't think the writers were actually copying and pasting from My Name is Asher Lev, but there certainly are a lot of similarities between the protagonists' experiences. And in the same vein, by the same token, you can find similarities in other communities as well, people leaving other restrictive religious systems. So it's not an accident, but every story is unique, every story is different, and every story is important.
Thank you. Message from Chantel. How has the film been received by those still in the Hasidic community? Is there a good place to view a few perspectives on this?
I think Frimet will probably have something to say about that as well. But I'm just going to say that I was surprised, or not so surprised, at the number of messages I received from people inside the Hasidic community telling me, thanking me for how beautifully, we portrayed their community and how they relate and identify with, the characters and the stories portrayed in the film. Of course, I would say the vast majority of the Satmar community especially does not appreciate being portrayed at all. Certainly not by Hollywood. I don't think they would appreciate any portrayal whatsoever. Certainly not something that portrays them kind of holistically, warts and all. So they, but by the same token, again, the vast majority of them don't watch the show, wouldn't watch the show, don't watch TV. And even if they would, they wouldn't appreciate the nuances of the characters, because this kind of storytelling really doesn't exist. It's completely foreign to that world. That world is used to stories of kind of good and evil. Everything is either good or evil. There really is very little nuance in storytelling. So, of course, I would say that most Satmar people inside the community would not appreciate the story, but I was surprised at the number of people that do appreciate it.
Thank you, Eli. Does Frimet want to say something about this, or?
Yeah. Well, so the people who reached out to Eli, I'm guessing a lot of them are not your typical chassid or satmar chassid. They may be disillusioned with their own lives. For whatever reason, they can't leave. And I think the average satmar chassid hasn't watched the show. They may have heard about it, but they haven't watched it. I know my family members have not. But we don't talk about what's out there. Most families don't own TVs. They don't have real access to the internet. Smartphones are banned in the community that I grew up in, even though loopholes abound. And people have two phones, one a flip phone or a kosher phone, and the other one a smartphone. So they don't have the kind of access, and they don't participate in the entertainment that we take for granted. So a lot of them might not have seen it. They don't, like he said, I want to echo what he said about them not appreciating any representation of their community. They are an insular community, and they don't proselytize, and they're not interested for outsiders to really know their lifestyles. So I get a lot of hate mail for my writings, and but I also get messages like Eli. I get messages from people inside the community to thank me for writing about their experiences. So the overall, I think overall they don't appreciate it.
Thank you, Frimet. Our next question is from Vinka Jarrett, and she's asked, the show did not make this clear that this was an Hasidic community. As a Jew, I knew, and the title of Unorthodox also makes this unclear. One of the biggest issues with the series I had was that non-Jews would think this is about Orthodox Jews, which vary around the world in terms of their fanaticism and devoutness. Can you speak to this issue?
Well, I think we think our audiences are intelligent. Our audiences know how to use Google. There are a lot of nuances that we didn't make clear. I mean, there was a whole debate about the opening of the show, about the Eruv, whether people would understand that. And the showrunner just decided that audiences are intelligent and they can just Google it. And there are entire message boards all over the internet about that. And I think we try to stay away from spoon feeding certain information to our audiences. I don't think the average person thinks that all. I mean, in fact, this was kind of our objective. And most people are familiar with, kind of this very monolithic portrayal of Jews. All Jews are Zionists. All Jews speak Hebrew, and so on and so forth. So we actually wanted to steer away from that and present an image present a nuanced and specific image of a specific community that's not normally represented. So I think it's ironic that people think that because of that, now they'll think that all Jews are Satmar. I think I'm hoping that people are smarter than that.
Any thought on that, Frimet?
Yeah, I mean, can you reread the question just one more time, because I want to answer it directly.
The question was basically about the title being called Unorthodox, which is different than Hasidic. What do you think?
I mean, maybe someone in the Bible Belt, or someone in rural America. Most people know that there is a spectrum in the Jewish community. And, there are the Orthodox, and then the ultra-Orthodox, and then the Hasidic. So to say that Hasidim are representative of the full spectrum of even Orthodox Jews is just ridiculous. I think what Eli said, that they were hoping that their audience was more intelligent than that and would be able to Google and understand that Hasidim are just a very small fraction of Jewry in general, and even a very small percentage of Orthodox Jewry. You know, there's the spectrum in Orthodoxy goes from, you know, modern Orthodoxy, which is a community that is very secular and blends the, you know, secular ideals with traditional and Torah observance. And then there are the ultra-Orthodox, which is an umbrella term for the Hasidic, the Hasidim, the mainstream Orthodox, the what we call the yeshivish, or the non-Hasidic community. And then we have, you know, and within that ultra-Orthodox umbrella, we have the Hasidic community, which I would argue falls all the way to the right of the spectrum.
Thank you for clarifying that. We have actually a fan. She said, Chantel said, your story, Frimet, is so fascinating. I want to know more. So I'll share at the end of the conversation, I'll share everybody's social media and website as well. Diane asks, some of those experiences remind me of my Catholic school days. So that's not a question, more of a comment. And then let me see who else we have on here. Diane, is there any religion that doesn't want to control women? That's a comment or a question. Bunny, did they pick Berlin?
Can I just hop in on that?
Sure.
On that comment? I think what we often miss, and this is of course a result of religion, I guess, I would argue fundamentalist religion trying to control women, is internalized misogyny. That in my community, it wasn't as much the patriarchy who were controlling my life, but the women in the community who really internalized all of that. And they were the gatekeepers, and they are the gatekeepers of, you know, modesty and all of that we in the secular world would consider oppressive, right? Yeah, and I think that's an important point that we often miss in talking about, you know, women being oppressed in these communities.
Bunny asked, did they pick Berlin and Etsy, ST painfully thin like a survivor of the camps? Question for Eli.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Anything else or just yes?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I missed the question. The sound just completely cut out for me.
Oh,
So
okay. So the question is from Bunny, and she asked if they picked, so if the production picked Berlin and ST painfully thin like a survivor of the camps.
Well, of course, the parallel is not lost on us. I mean, the reason why the story takes place in Berlin is because it was written by writers that live in Berlin that were looking. Their actual first goal was to write a show about what it is to be a Jew in Berlin. The co-creators, Anna and Alexa. Anna is a New York Jew who's been living in Berlin for 20 years. Alexa is was born and raised in Germany and has since moved to LA. So they both wanted to write a show about what it is to be Jewish in present day Berlin. And when they met Deborah Feldman in Berlin, they realized they had the perfect vehicle for that story. So from the start, their intention was to write a show about being Jewish in Berlin. and so all the kind of Holocaust imagery and all the kind of ironies about, you know, her running away to Berlin and finding her freedom there are all kind of very, very pointed and intentional in that respect. But also, of course, some of it is just due to the realities of the kind of in which we were working. I mean, as a German-produced show, obviously it was a lot more economical to have the bulk of the story take place in Berlin rather than in New York. And of course, we filmed everything there as far as we could. All the interiors were shot in Berlin, just the exteriors were shot in New York. So this is primarily a German production.
Perry Yaniv, loved your acting work in this, as you've done double duty as Yiddish consultant and actor on other projects. How did you feel jumping into the ensemble on days when you were playing the rabbi?
That's always, thank you, Perry. Perry's a wonderful actor and a dear friend of mine. It's always challenging to be both behind the camera and in front of the camera, as I'm sure any actor / crew member would tell you. The hardest part is because all the scenes that I acted in, including the wedding, were also some of the most difficult scenes to consult on. And when you're acting in the scene, of course, you want to forget about the set, you want to forget about the costumes, you don't want to worry about other actors' lines and pronunciation, and you want to just home in on your character. And that was very challenging, but at the same time, we had an amazing crew and an amazing cast, and everybody worked really hard to make sure that everything went right.
Chantel is interested in learning more about the Hasidic community. She's asking for recommendations, books, or films that you can recommend.
Is that for Ellie? Or I guess we can both answer. I highly, highly recommend Shulam Dean's, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on the title.
All who go do not
All
return.
Who go do not return. Yes, thank you, Ellie.
And I echo that. I echo that recommendation. I think it's far and away the best book in the genre. It would also be interesting for some of you because it represents the kind of the male perspective of leaving, which of course the show doesn't really focus on. In terms of a TV or film recommendation, I think Shtisel, even though technically it doesn't portray the Hasidic community, it portrays the non-Hasidic ultra-Orthodox community in Jerusalem. There are many similarities, culturally speaking. So, and I think in a way, it is probably the best example of the genre, and it really portrays the community in a really beautiful and sympathetic light.
Another question from Moy. Can you tell us something about the scene where they cut her hair? That was a powerful scene.
Okay, so this was the first day of shooting.
Oh.
The first day of shooting, we shot the mikveh scene. That was the very first scene. And the second scene was the haircut.
Can you explain what the mikveh is? Because for some people who are joining us.
Yes, the mikveh is the ritual bath that Esti immerses in before the wedding. So those were the two most difficult scenes for Shira as a woman, as an actor. And this was a decision by production that we should do those scenes on the first day in consultation with Shira. And I think everybody agreed that this would be the best way for Shira to actually immediately become immersed in the character. But of course, for us, it was our first day working with her. I didn't quite know what to expect. And everybody was incredibly nervous, including Ronit, who played Malka, who actually did the shaving. Of course, being that she actually shaved her head, it wasn't special effects, it was real. Obviously we can only do that in one take. So everybody was really nervous about that. Ronit practiced with a wig on a doll's head. And Jens, who is the head of hair and makeup, gave her some tutorials on head shaving. But then once the camera started rolling, she was on her own. And we were in this this wonderful, huge sound stage. And I was watching in the Cinema Village with the director. So we're watching this on a monitor, but it's happening in the same room, essentially, just, you know, about 30 or 40 feet away behind a wall. And as she starts shaving, I mean, Shira just becomes transformed. And she starts crying, but not like really, really ugly crying. And I was so convinced that this was real, that I came very close to screaming, "Stop, what are you doing? She's clearly not taking this very well." It was so quiet in there, you can hear a pin drop during that entire scene. I mean, it was one of the most moving things I've ever experienced it, and I wasn't the one being shaved. So that's my perspective. I'm sure Frimet can offer a different perspective as to what that's actually like.
So I want to ask you a question, Ellie, because I was very unsettled by the fact that there were two girls gawking while she was, which is not part of the tradition at all. It's usually done in the bride's new home, you know, in the couple's new home. The mother comes over the morning after the wedding and shaves the head. And it's a very matter-of-fact incident. Like I did not feel, I often get asked, how did you feel when they shaved your head? I didn't feel violated. I know that's what I'm supposed to say. That's what people want to hear, that I felt violated. And that might be the experience for many. It wasn't for me, because I was raised knowing that I will have to shave my head when I got married. Everyone did it. That was my world. It never occurred to me that I could grow my own hair, that there is a world of Orthodox women who grow their own hair and cover it with a wig, that there is even a way to be Orthodox without covering your hair, that there is a way to be Jewish and wear pants. And, you know, all of those things did not exist in my world. My worldview was so minuscule. So I didn't feel violated that first day. My mother shaved my head. I had a new wig waiting on a wig head. I was really excited to wear my new wig. There's that excitement of, you know, being a married woman and going out in the street and everyone seeing you as this newly married woman with your new husband, and you parade around town. And I didn't feel it. I couldn't relate to Este's distress on the screen. I mean, I felt for her, but I couldn't relate. It just didn't resonate with me. I did feel violated when I had to shave my head that final time, because they threatened to expel my son from school. And that was the first time that I felt violated. And that was sort of my my first autonomous decision as a woman when I said, as I finished shaving, I said, this is the last time I'm shaving. And that was the first time that I felt that head shaving is wrong, or at least forced head shaving is wrong. I can assure you that my sisters who shave their heads, that my friends in the community who shave their heads, that they don't have those intense feelings that we expect them to have surrounding head shaving. So I think that it's important to know that there are various reactions to head shaving, and that Esti's reaction may not be representative of the rest of what women feel when they shave their heads, when they have their heads shaved.
Yeah. So about that scene, I know that generally there aren't necessarily people in the room. People I spoke to said that it was actually done at their mother's house, not in their apartment, and that kids, although not necessarily in the room, little girls were home. They may have been running around at the time. They may have been in and out of the room. And of course, for storytelling reasons, they decided to put the girls in the room. As far as a reaction, I think, you know, what I expressed, I was really just transferring my own feelings, watching it onto Shira. I don't think she was acting distressed. I think it was kind of an overwhelm, you know, mixed feelings. Part of it is resolve. Part of it is extreme sacrifice, because it is talked about sometimes as a sacrifice. I know that is kind of one of the apologetics that people use, that they liken the head shaving to a sacrifice. So I think she was kind of trying to portray a range of emotions there. But of course, that's not necessarily always the case. And for many people, if not most people, it's probably pretty routine.
Can I just say, Shira
Yeah.
and Amit Rahav are phenomenons. While watching it, I was reminded of Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver in The Marriage Story. The Marriage Story? I can't remember. But they were just fantastic. And the way they embraced their roles and really, truly represented what those roles were meant to be, I think was fantastic. And I want to congratulate them on a job well done.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. It's 1 after, and we could be here for hours. You both have really fascinating stories, and I hope that we can stay in touch so that our audience can also know more about you. So I posted your information in the chat. Please copy and paste. I'm so sorry we didn't go through all the other questions. I think we had 2 other more, but we can continue maybe on Facebook. There is a Facebook Live right now going on, so you can ask your questions there. Maybe you can chime in. So thank you, Eli. Thank you, Frimet, for your time, and Emma Bell for moderating and leading the talk today. I hope that you can join us next week for Orange is the New Black. That's what the series that we're going to talk about. And the week after, we're going to talk about Fauda. So a lot of interesting talents that we're going to host in the next few weeks. Thank you again. Maybe a last word from Eli.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. It was really a pleasure. And I do hope to meet you.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I do hope to. When this is over, I hope we can have some celebration and maybe a whole Shabbat together.
I'll host.
That would be lovely.
Thank
You're
you.
on. You're on.
Emma, you'll have to come from Los
You're
Angeles.
so on.
Hopefully we can travel via plane again and I'll be able to fly in.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all our
Thank you.
members for joining, and join us next week. So next week, it won't be at 12. It will be at 1 p.m. Eastern time, just to let you know. Thank you all. Bye. Have a great weekend. Stay safe.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.